I think we're going to get started because we have a packed and exciting program for you guys this afternoon. So a huge welcome to all of you. Good morning, afternoon, wherever you are. I think we have quite an international audience with us today, which is very exciting. So welcome to this We by Nature food and beverage training, which we are officially launching for the first time as part of this We by Nature 10-day challenge event. We'll be sharing a bit more about the big event. Perhaps some of you guys have had a chance to join some of the other sessions that have been happening, but this is really a session that is taking place as part of this big 10-day challenge with the aim of really having action-oriented sessions like this one, being practical, and today will be all about that. So a warm welcome to have you guys all here. And we're very excited to kick off this training with you guys. So we're going to be looking at natural capital within the food and beverage sector specifically. And this training builds off of existing training material from We by Nature, that we have adapted it to really suit the specific needs and challenges of the food and beverage sector. So before we get into the training, we'll go through a few introductory slides. I think probably a lot of you guys by now have heard about the We by Nature campaign, but I realize there's also many of you guys that are new. So a quick word about who We by Nature is. It's a 3-year campaign, which is funded by the European Commission under the Horizon 2020 grant. The main aim of the campaign is to really make valuing nature the new normal across Europe and beyond as well. And to do so, we do a series of practical actions. One of them is sharing best practices, useful case studies. There's a lot of work around understanding what are the actual barriers and opportunities for business to adopt natural capital approaches. And today is a perfect example of some of the more practical kind of support that we do as well, which is to deliver and develop training material for business on natural capital. And finally, we work extremely closely with the Natural Capital Coalition, and actually I should say the Capitals Coalition. As you can see, we're a broad range of partners involved in this campaign, such as the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, which I'm representing today, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, as well as OPLA. And all of us together are directly contributing to the work of the Capitals Coalition. So quite an array of partners involved. Today, we have another partner with us, which is Nature Squared. I'm hugely thankful to Dan and Iris, who are going to be carrying us through today's training. Dan and Iris are coming from Nature Squared, who have been the leading partner in developing this food and beverage training material. They've put a lot of blood, sweat, and heart in this material, and I'm sure they're as excited as me to finally be able to launch this with you guys. So I wish to here as well, thank again Dan and Iris for all the amazing work that they've done. Quick few house rules. I know we're all starting to get familiar now, but always good to remind these anyway. Do please make sure that you are joining us today through the Zoom app or through your computer software. The reason I'm saying that is because we will have a quick little group discussion in breakout rooms. So if there's for any reason that you're joining us from phone, if you can change, that would be best, because otherwise you won't be able to take part into the breakout rooms. I've already mentioned this to some of you guys, but those that are joining now, it would be great if you can please just add the name of your organization next to your name. If you just go into the participants list and click on more, you can then rename yourself to add your organization's name. So that way we can all have an idea of who's coming from where. Today, I invite you to all make use of the chat function at the bottom of your screen to share any comments, reflections, and obviously any questions you may have throughout the training. We'll be responding to them either directly within the chat, or we may take some of them live during the training. As I've mentioned before, feel free to turn your camera on. We want this training to be a very familial space and for you to feel comfortable, but obviously there's no obligation into doing that. We all have our potential personal things going around in the background as well, so that's perfectly fine. However, please do make sure that you stay on mute when not speaking, and do remember to unmute yourself when we are into group discussions. So we are going to be having an interactive training today. We'll have, like I said, a chance to speak in groups during one specific little exercise. We're also going to be using the chat and Mentimeter questions if time allows. So who is your support team for today? Well, I'll briefly present myself. I'm Katja Bonga. I work at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, WBCSD. I've been working there for the past nearly 4 years now. I'm part of the Redefining Value program. But for the last 2.5 years, I've been really leading on all of the training activities for the We Value Nature campaign. As you've seen, WBCSD is one of the key partners in this campaign, and we've really taken the leading role on all of the capacity building efforts. And it's my pleasure to welcome, obviously, Dan and Iris today, who I'll let quickly introduce themselves to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan. I'm a director with Nature Squared, a small project office working on the natural capital and biodiversity topics, where we specialize on connecting ecology and economics. And we've been really happy and glad to be involved in the introduction training that we prepared for you today, and to develop a whole array of support materials that will also be briefly presented and that will be launched today. So really happy to be here.
And my name is Iris Visser. I'm working as an analyst and project manager at Nature Squared. And it has been a real pleasure to develop these training materials specifically for the food and beverage sector, and to also develop additional training sectors specifically for the food and beverage sector. And I'm also very excited that next week we will have another session on exactly this topic, but then moving forward to really focus on what are the first steps to really undertake a natural capital assessment yourselves. So pleased to have you all, and I'm excited today.
Thanks, Dan and Iris. And another person we'll have a chance to hear towards the end of the training, so make sure you do stay until the end, is Volkert Engelsman. He is the CEO of Eosta, which is an international distributor of fresh and organic fruits and vegetables based in the Netherlands. And so he's going to be sharing with us his experience as a CEO working on natural capital issues, and sort of his journey within that subject and the kind of work that they've been implementing. So I won't say much more to that to keep the surprise, but extremely excited and thankful to also have Volkert with us. And he'll have a chance to quickly present himself later on today. So quickly on the agenda, I'm not going to go too much into detail on this because you should have all received the training brochure, which outlines the agenda. But just to say that we are going to have a little 10-minute coffee break around 3 to let you have a little bit of a breather. So it's going to be quite a straightforward training. We'll be starting with an introduction on what natural capital is, have a quick little group discussion, and then we'll get into a bit of an intro into some more practical approaches before hearing Eosta's natural capital journey presentation. And then we hope to wrap up with some lessons learned with you guys and next steps that you can take. So what are the objectives for today's training? Dan has already mentioned that it's going to be an introductory training into natural capital. So today is not going to be about going into the technical details of how to measure, how to put a monetary value on natural capital. We are going to give some initial insights into that. But first and foremost, today is really going to be about understanding what natural capital is, how it links with business decision-making and risk management, what are natural capital impacts and dependencies, and why these are crucial to identify as a first step in your assessment, and what are some risks and opportunities as well. And obviously we'll be discussing these points really in relation to the food and beverage sector. And then, as I've mentioned towards the end, we'll be looking at some more practical approaches. So how can you concretely start looking at applying natural capital in business decision making? Today, you're going to see that a lot of the training we have developed is based on the Natural Capital Protocol. For those of you that aren't familiar, the protocol is a standardized framework which was developed from many hundreds of experts coming from NGOs, businesses, and other experts on the subject. And it's really aimed at helping businesses and other types of organizations identify, measure, and value their impacts and dependencies on natural capital. And what you can see is that it constitutes essentially a 4-stage stages and 9 steps to go through in undertaking an industrial assessment. And today, as part of the introductory module, we are going to be focusing on the first few steps, which you can see are highlighted here. So that's really what forms the basis of our material and of our training. And you should have also all received in the email sent yesterday a little primer of the protocol. A few other useful materials for you to be aware of. Again, you should have all hopefully received the participant workbook, which I really encourage you to use today. We've purposely sent it in a Word format for you to be able to easily take notes as we go through the training today. When you look at adult learning theory, note-taking is a crucial component in really engaging your learning processes. So we encourage you to do that throughout the training today. And finally, obviously another key resource for us today is the Food and Beverage Sector Guide, which is a supplement to the protocol and really helps specifically the sector in applying the Natural Capital Protocol. So that also plays a crucial role in today's training, as well as the TEEB for Agriculture and Food Operational Guidelines for Business. All of these links should be into your workbook as well. Finally, just perhaps good for you guys to know, all of We by Nature's training material is available and free for anyone to download and use. You can do so directly on our We by Nature website under the training resources page. You can even adapt the training material, which means that you can use, for example, our 1-hour version of the training and then put in some different slides or slightly adapt some of them as you wish, as long as you appropriately attribute. So you can also find further details on how to actually do that on our website. We will be having all of these food and beverage training materials also integrated on our website in about 1 or 2 weeks' time, but we will be sending, in any case, the presentation slides that you'll be seeing today, as well as the recording after the training. So that's it in terms of quick welcoming from our side. And we'd love to just hear a little bit more about you guys as well on the line. So if you can now make use of the chat at this point and share a bit more with us. Well, first of all, what role do you play in this supply chain? So what we have here is the food and beverage supply chain, which is coming directly from the food and beverage sector supplement of the protocol. And you may not be from in any of those supply chain roles, which is fine. In that case, just let us know where you're coming from. And also if you have any specific expectations for today, is there anything that you're really eager to learn about? It would be really great to hear. So just make use of the chat here and let us know a bit more about you. And then this is good practice for you guys also to start making use of the chat. Great, so we already have an answer from John. Jonathan, you're a consumer. Great. Marilyn, farmer and manufacturer. Great, interesting. So let us know also what you would be hoping to hear about or learn about today. And hopefully we should have quite a diverse crowd in terms of the supply chain as well. So Sagrario, you are, oops, sorry, getting a lot of responses here. CEO in a social company helping indigenous communities. Great, nice to have you, Sagrario, and let us know also if there's something specific that you're hoping to learn today. Anna, you're a principal ecologist in the UK, and you're doing more work on natural capital, which may be an important drinks brand in the future. And they are really interested in improving their credentials in this area. Great. This should hopefully be quite useful to you, and even better if you can actually then take on this material and potentially provide a training yourself as well. So we got Jörg, chartered accountant, engineer based in Ireland, seeking new professional directions. Great, welcome Jörg. So we got a few academics as well, super. Hopefully you'll be able to challenge also some of the content. So Olivier, external consultancy, expectations to ground the broad conditions to apply the natural cattle protocol for a soft drinks company. Okay, great. So today you'll definitely be learning about some of the fundamentals behind the protocol and especially those first few steps like I've mentioned. We've got Doris Geidemann, great to have you. Doris was actually involved in a roundtable on the food and beverage industry we did a while back, so nice to have you. So you're from Simrise, which is a flavor and fragrance with more than 1,000 raw materials, so many natural and renewable sources. You're in the corporate sustainability department. Your expectation is to better understand the protocol and how to start implementing it, not as a technical, but thinking tool first. Great. Well, actually, again, this introductory will be a great way to first actually understand not necessarily the technical aspects yet, but more sort of the initial thinking that needs to happen when starting an assessment. And then, Doris, it might be really useful for you to also join the second module, which will go much more into the practical aspects of conducting an assessment. Great. Well, really nice to see some of these answers coming in. Please continue to share. I'm not going to read all of them because it would be a bit long, but please do continue to share. It would be great to hear more. All right. So I'd like to just take a few minutes to set the scene very quickly into the topic, because I think we're at quite a turning and crucial point here into the topic. As we know, we're currently hit by a massive pandemic, which has brought forward not only a better awareness of the strong linkages between our economy, society, and our natural environment, but has also really set a certain urgency, I think. And so I always like to show these two comics because I find that they speak a million words. We are seeing right now with COVID-19 numerous challenges that we're going through. But what this first image is showing is that, in fact, COVID is just one of the first big waves that we'll be going through. And there's much more bigger challenges right behind that we need to really start tackling. And that includes, obviously, the economic recession that's going to follow, and then some more underlying ones that are getting more and more visible, such as climate change, and then the very complex one of the biodiversity collapse. And so today's 10-day challenge event and trainings like this one is coming at a crucial point where 2020 was meant to be that super year, but obviously was completely shattered down. But nonetheless, we've seen a lot of businesses and governments coming forward with strong commitments for nature, which is great. But now that needs to go a next step further. We need to now really ensure that 2021 is that year where these commitments are turned into actions. And that's really what we're not only hoping to help do today through the training in providing some helpful practical tips, but also throughout the 10-day challenge and the different sessions that we are proposing. And so today is a training that's going to be on natural capital, but that's not to say that the other types of capitals are not just as crucial. I also like to show this one because it's straight to the point, and essentially it comes down to financial performance is irrelevant on a dead planet. So what are we going to do about it? We need to really start integrating nature into our financial and business decision makings. And again, we're going to try and tune into that a bit today. We're seeing how the global risk landscape is changing, and a great way to show that is the World Economic Forum annual report that is released every year. And this just goes to show again the urgency in which we are. If you look just about 10 years back, none of the top global risks in terms of likelihood and impact were environmentally related. And just 10 years later, what we can see now is that nearly all of them in terms of impact and in terms of likelihood are related to the environment. And for the first time this year, the WEF report has shown that biodiversity is now one of the top risks that we're facing as well as biodiversity loss. So what that means is that businesses are increasingly having to manage their environmental, social, and governmental risks. But there's not just risks, there's also opportunities. And what you can see here are some of the main risks and opportunities that businesses are typically going to be facing. And these are also based from the Natural Capital Protocol. So there's going to be an operational risk, there's going to be reputational and societal risks, legal risks, as well as financial risks. And when we look at the food and beverage sector, well, the whole question of nature and biodiversity obviously are even more so crucial to this sector. In terms of operational risk, we can find such things such as land degradation, water availability, which can then disrupt production processes. The reputational aspect comes into any business sector, to be honest, especially with the increasing awareness and demand from consumers for shifting the way we produce elements and consume them as well. The legal risks as well is something that we can find in any business sector, and this can be linked to new regulation coming in, or also claims, for example, on the use of chemical inputs. And then financial risk tends to be a risk that can often link to any of these ones. So if there's a reputational damage, it'll often translate also into a financial risk, which can mean decreased margins. It can also make access to finance more difficult. But I always like to say that the good news is that wherever there's financial risk, there's also opportunities to save cost, opportunities to engage with stakeholders, opportunities to be innovative and rework your business model. So the opportunities are numerous as well. And again, especially when looking at the food and beverage sector, there's many that we can highlight here. We've got the whole question around supply chain security and how regenerative agriculture and circular economy play a crucial role in that. We also have reputational aspects that come in here. So for example, an example we could share is that of Nespresso, who are aiming to be carbon neutral by 2022 in terms of every Nespresso cup that they're producing. We also have legal opportunities in terms of preparing ourselves for new regulations, new consumer demands, etc. And then finally, we also have financial opportunities. And actually, the few companies that you see on the slide here on the top bottom right are companies that have managed to secure multi-billion loans linked to their ESG performance. So that is, the better they perform on an environmental, social, and governance level, the less they repay in terms of interest rate. And that's something that we're seeing happening more and more as well. So what does that mean in terms of the pandemic? And I feel we can't kick off this training without acknowledging this pandemic, because there's a lot of parallels to bring here. We're seeing a big push from governments across the world for a green recovery. And actually, Christine Lagarde, who's the president of the European Bank, has also provided a strong push around that. The crisis has also shown that business as usual is no longer possible, and that we really need to shift towards what we're talking more and more about, stakeholder capitalism, and also integrated capitals. Again, today we are going to be focusing on natural capital, but I want to stress the importance that an integrated approach is absolutely crucial. So this is setting the scene and in which we are, and I think there's no better time to really be dipping down a bit more into the role of natural capital in helping business manage their impacts and dependencies, as well as their risks and opportunities. And I'm going to now hand over to Dan, who's going to now kick off this training with you and walk you through the introduction of this. Thanks, Dan. Oh, you're muted. Still muted.
Sorry there. Yes, thank you very much, Katja, for this great introduction and setting the scene. Yes, today we will be talking about what is natural capital and what is the business case for assessing it. And before I start with the training, one thing that I like to say is that we have selected just a few elements of the overall training that you will be able to access later online. We have actually developed a full day training with various interactive elements, games, a lot of interactivity that we want to include also today, but we have a shorter time window of only 2 hours, which is also, I think, the best time frame for an online meeting. So we will be going over some things a bit shorter than we could be doing in a full day training. But nevertheless, I think by the end of today, you have a very good understanding and a good starting point on what natural capital is and what's the business case for assessing natural capital as a food and beverage company. So I want to start this training with a little video, which is developed as part of the WBCSD, and I will just play it now.
Hi, I'm John. I work for a company, a big company that still doesn't realize it relies on nature, which is why I'm organizing a meeting, a big meeting, to discuss natural capital. It's a new idea to boost our business. You've heard of financial capital, right? So what is natural capital? Well, let's take company A, that's us. We make shoes, lots of shoes. So let's take a shoe. This one's a leather. Leather comes from cows. To make a cow, you need grass and grain. That's a lot of land and a lot of water. To make a shoe, you gotta have a sole. Do you think soles come from thin air? Get a grip. We need rubber, and lots of it. This rubber comes from rubber trees. Trees need land, soil, and water. We need aluminium for eyelets, another natural resource. Let's keep moving. We need energy, water, chemicals, dyes. Our shops need building, cooling, lighting, heating. And when our shoes wear out, imagine this. Severe floods hit somewhere important in our supply chain. Livelihoods are lost. Our factories fail. Hashtag corporate nightmare. But does it have to be that way? What if we replant forests to protect our sites from floods? Or restore wetlands to filter water? Or turn old shoes into something new? What if we realized that investing in natural infrastructure could save us cash too? So back to my question, what is natural capital? It's all the value that nature provides for us, the natural assets we have. If our company had to pay for our impact on nature, we'd owe $6 a pair. That's real money. So ask yourself, what does nature provide for your business? And shouldn't it be on your balance sheet?
Yeah, so I think that little video just now showed us some of the basic aspects of what natural capital is and why it's invaluable for us to have a good understanding of how it relates to the companies that we're working for. But we also wanted you just to provide you with a proper definition of it. And as was discussed before, for this training, we have aligned very much with the Natural Capital Protocol and then Capitals Coalition. So this is the exact definition as you will also find it within the protocol. So natural capital is the stock of renewable and non-renewable natural resources, such as plants, animals, air, water, soils, and minerals that combine to yield a flow of services to people. And these services and those flows provide real value to business and society. And to give you a little bit more of an understanding, we've worked it out a little bit. First of all, one of the key concepts here is biodiversity. And biodiversity underpins the stocks and ecosystem services. So without biodiversity, a lot of the ecosystem services that we rely on will just not be there and will not be generated. So biodiversity is really at the core of natural capital, and they are the engine, so to say, that to provide all these natural capital flows and all the ecosystem services. To give just a simple example, a rich diversity of plants, bacteria and animals can provide a good habitat for bees. And bees are instrumental to pollinating around 87 of the leading food crops around the world. And as an estimate, you can say that insect pollination increases crop yield of these crops by a quarter. So through that mechanism, their value for especially the food and beverage industry, for the agri-food sectors, is quite clear. We've already discussed now the element of ecosystem services, but I can imagine that for some this is a bit of a academic concept, so we want to give you a little bit more background on that as well. So ecosystem services are the benefits to people, to society, that derive from ecosystems. And you can think of elements such as climate regulation, through carbon sequestration, for example, or by providing shade or moisturing the air and the wind, all the way up to water purification, soil biodiversity, pollination, recreation, and even there's a lot of links with health. In all, ecosystem services can be categorized in 4 main categories: a category of provisioning, a category of regulating, a category of cultural, and a category of supporting ecosystem services. Within provisioning ecosystem services, you can think of the fact that ecosystems can provide with food, with fresh water, with fibers, with wood for timber, all kinds of biochemicals or ingredients for natural medicines. The regulating ecosystem services are, for example, pollination, climate regulation, the cleaning of water and air, regulating soil erosion. Services. Sometimes they can feel a little bit intangible, but actually some of these, when you go to the step of monetizing them, are actually very, very powerful and very valuable. So you can think about recreational values, ecotourism, spiritual or religious values, educational and ethical values. And then the last category is a series of ecosystem services that underpin the other ecosystem services. Without those, the others will not be happening. And these are ecosystem services such as nutrient cycling, water cycling, primary production, and photosynthesis. All these ecosystem services work together and are linked, and they are underpinning each other, and they are, you cannot take simply just one out of the equation and expect all the other ecosystem services to maintain and to be happening. But nevertheless, what we have now highlighted with these green blocks is some of the key ecosystem services that are extremely relevant for any company in the food and beverage industry. And one of the reasons why this is quite helpful is that when you are performing a natural capital assessment, as we will see later, you will often perform also a materiality analysis and see which links, which dependencies, which impacts are most material for you as a company. And then this pre-selection can be quite helpful, but it's still always good to go through all of the ecosystem services for your specific company, but this can serve as a good starting point there. When preparing this training materials, we had the opportunity to talk with quite a few companies, network organizations, farmers, all kinds of important organizations that are part of our target audience for this training. For example, we organized a roundtable, which was really helpful. And one of the key messages that we kept hearing is natural capital. It's understanding, or it's interesting. I understand the general value of it, but how does everything fit in to each other? How is everything linked? And if I'm ready to understand natural capital, that's one thing. But how can I explain to my colleagues, how can I get the institutional buy-in that I need to move this forward without confusing my colleagues, without adding a new chapter, a new burden on our sustainability strategy. And that's a message that we really received loud and clear. And thinking about it, it became for us apparent that we needed to first demonstrate how this is always linked, but also from our understanding of natural capital, convey a message that actually natural capital is not necessarily something completely new, something that you have to revisit your entire strategy, or something that even if it's not in your strategy already as a term, that you don't already do something with it. But more so, it is actually, we see it as a lens to look at your sustainability policy and to get a better understanding of where you should be directing your sustainability efforts, and to also direct it where it matters most. So natural capital is an important tool and a lens to re-establish and reassess what your sustainability strategy should be directed to. And it is a great way to uncover some blind spots, some important dependent, or you are impacting something that has to do with natural capital, but you may not be aware of it yet. So it's a great way to uncover that. And lastly, it's also a great way of linking your sustainability strategy to your business case and to the core processes of the company, because it really takes a value approach and not only an approach of what is good or what is bad or what needs to be done. It's really about how are you as a company also reliant on natural capital, and it's getting that systems thinking approach where you really understand your place within the whole all the ecosystems and natural capital. So this is just a very, very short overview, but shortly we will be having this infographic with a lot of background information available and of the synergy between the efforts, and also get a better understanding of where you can set the next steps in your natural capital journey. Because in the end, business depends on natural capital and business impacts natural capital. This is a little scheme from the Natural Capital Protocol Food and Beverage Sector Guide that makes quite clear how these links work and how they are talking amongst each other. But the core message is there is not a single company, especially in food and beverage, that does not rely on natural capital and that is not impacting natural capital. Of course, these impacts, they don't have to be negative impacts. There's also a great opportunity for positive impacts and for benefits. And that is actually a huge opportunity for the food and beverage sector and for the agricultural sector, is that although a lot of agricultural practices now are unfortunately not sustainable, there is this huge opportunity to transition towards a regenerative form of agriculture that actually sequesters carbon, that purifies water and air, that provides a lot of social capital for farmers. So we are actually not in a position of despair, although the biodiversity loss is actually happening very fast, but there is this huge opportunity to increase biodiversity, to improve the economic standing of farmers, and to actually improve our total economy by it, because when you start doing natural capital accounting at the scale of the planet, one of the things that we're seeing, and there's been some really interesting research on this, is that actually the value of our natural economy, which is now somewhere in our shadows, we don't measure it in all the regular bookkeeping, but that is estimated at 3 times higher than the value of the economy that we are measuring. And at the same time, we are losing over 4 trillion of value of natural ecosystems each year. So actually, although we have this feeling that there's a choice to be made between economic progress and taking care of our ecosystem, it's actually the other way around. By taking care of our ecosystems, we are actually taking care also of our future in an economic way. So yes, we all have our impacts through supply chains, but there's also a huge opportunity to make positive impacts. And I think that's really the direction that as a food and beverage company, you can have a huge opportunity to be part of that solution, to be part of combating climate change, of reversing biodiversity loss, while creating great products for your clients. So again, some of these negative impacts we are quite aware of. There's problems with greenhouse gas emissions, there's water problems, there are quality of soil, but there's also this huge opportunity to create cleaner water, to sequester carbon, to improve biodiversity. So yeah, I like to focus on the opportunities. So when you're thinking and when you're applying the natural capital protocol, a key concept there is impact drivers, which are measurable quantities of a natural resource used as an input to production, or measurable outputs that do not directly relate to the product, but are a product in itself of your production process, such as water discharges. And these impact drivers are an important element to focus on when you're doing that natural capital assessment. So what is the entire impact pathway, dependency pathway of your business and of your core processes within your business? So we have this example here. For example, livestock farming, can be pigs, can be cows. It will end up on a plate, but first it will be has to be cut, it has to be cooled, it has to be packaged, and it will end up on a plate in a restaurant nearby. But somewhere in that process, there will be a lot of fresh water that needs to be used, land needs to be used, there will be waste, there will be manure, there will be air pollution, there can be discharges to water and soil. And these are really the key elements that you need to get a better understanding of after doing a natural capital assessment. Because when you understand your impact drivers, you can also start understanding how can you reduce your impacts, how you can move to a positive impact, and also the same goes for dependencies. Within the natural capital protocol, there's a number of steps. Today we will be focusing on the first steps, so really to get started with your natural capital journey and to scope the objective of your assessment. But we will come to this a bit later. But the key steps when it comes to actual doing your assessment are, of course, when you go towards step 5, 6, and 7 of the protocol, and you actually start measuring your impact drivers, you also start measuring the change of an alternative practice or the way that you're working. And you go to the next step of value and impact. Unfortunately, that will not be happening today due to the short time, but next week we will go into a little bit further on how you can actually do this. As I said, just like impact pathways, there's also pathways around dependencies. I'm gonna skip those just for the purpose of saving some time and also allowing you to have a good group discussion with each other, because we have a small group exercise where we will actually go further into what are the impacts and what are the dependencies. So we are a little bit behind schedule. Please forgive me for that, but we will be able to have a good group discussion now. And that discussion will be revolving around the next hypothetical example. So you are working for an agribusiness and you are producing crops such as oranges. What would be your main impacts on nature, and are they positive or negative? And what kind of dependencies are there for your company? So take a moment to think about it, and in the meantime, Katja will explain the technical way that we will be able to do this exercise together.
Thanks, Dan. And it sounds scary. There's nothing technical with what you're going to have to do now in a second, actually. So it's really meant to be a simple little, it's just a good way to kick off the discussion. So as Dan just said, imagine you're working for an agribusiness producing oranges. How might you impact on nature, and how might you rely on it as well? We've purposely kept the question quite broad. So this is really a way for you to discuss in many different ways on this topic. So feel free to do so in your group. What we'll do is I've put you guys into small little groups. You'll be no more than 3 people per group. And you're gonna have now about 10, probably more around 10 minutes to quickly discuss through that hypothetical example that Dan just suggested. We also have that hypothetical example included in your workbook, which I sent to you. So in case you just quickly want to look back into it, you can do that. So nothing complex here, guys. You don't have to do anything. You will automatically be put into your little room. And I will let you also know how much time you have left to discuss. And then we'll come back and very briefly share any useful elements that came out from your discussions. So give me just one moment to launch this. All right, so the rooms are ready. So enjoy the conversations, and then we'll come back in plenary in just a bit.
Yeah, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had an interesting discussion and a good opportunity to also meet some of your counterparts that are participating in this training. Yeah, we are moving towards a quick break, but before doing that, we would love to hear back from you. So I would like to open the floor and hear from some of you what came out of your discussion, what surprised you, which were some insights that you gained, and which were the key points that you've discussed. So please go ahead.
Yeah, Pim, you're welcome to.
I thought it was very nice that our group was very diverse, so everyone had very valuable input from different sectors of the industry. And we thought, first of all, the context is pretty specific, whether it's a monoculture, whether it's a very big scale, whether agroforestry is produced, what the land use was of that particular area before it was an orange garden. And next to it, we thought there was a big supply side issue as well, what the water maintenance was, the water control, and whether the food was used and consumed in the domestic markets or somewhere in a different continent in the world, because the infrastructure for those international food markets would also require a lot of natural capital.
Wow, you've raised already a lot of really good points. So bringing in a lot of, that's a very good point you've raised. The context is crucial. We've obviously purposely kept it very simple, but indeed, if you start thinking about, where is located the crops as well may change a lot, right? If you're in an area that's perhaps already has scarce water resources, for example, then obviously we can imagine that the dependencies and impacts on water are even greater than a region that has an abundance of water. So it's very rightfully put forward that the context is actually key in this. And I think you were also mentioning up to where also in the supply chain they were producing or exporting, what maybe also perhaps some other groups have thought about the impacts in terms of CO2 emissions of transporting some of the crops. So yeah, raised are some really good points here. Anyone else that wants to share some outputs from the group? I will point to specific people if I don't hear anything.
We didn't get a chance to speak about this, but one thing I just wanted to raise was about pollination. I think that's such a key service in agriculture, and there's such potential for using natural pest control, which isn't really something that's thought about very much. There's way too much use of pesticides. So I think the discussion about pollination services and natural pest control services can go hand in hand in this sort of that sort of sector.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really, really practical point about how you actually on the farm can move from more conventional practices towards regenerative agriculture. And I think, what happens on the farm really is key within natural capital thinking within the food and beverage industry. So that's a good point, and it's really connected to a lot of other farmer practices that are important, such as soil conservation, sequestering carbon, shade trees, and a lot of those.
Great, thanks for sharing, John. Any last points from anyone else?
The scale. We need to understand, that an impact in a small scale farm is one thing, the impact on a big farm is another thing. So scale is important, and we tend to forget that. And the next one, the natural capital in the northern parts of Portugal, where I'm from, could not be the same that in the southern parts of Portugal. So scale and location is everything, and we need to be really careful, really careful when look to impacts and dependencies because of that.
Yeah, so you really have to understand the local context, both in needs and landscape, but also on skill.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point. It's also a point that we will come back to when we're talking about methodologies.
And I don't know if this was mentioned, I don't think so, but it's something we're going to be able to have a chance to hear from Volkert later this afternoon. There's also differences on whether you're producing organically or not, and what may be the different consequences to that as well. So you guys have all raised some really good points here already. So as you've very well summarized, Antonio, it's about the scale. What value chain pieces are we looking at? What is the local context like? And what are the impacts and dependencies that are going to be most material to your company based on your industry, but also, again, the objectives and location in which you are. So there's many components that you need to think about. But that's already, just even this 10-minute discussion, you guys have already managed to think through quite some complex issues and how you can easily get started on what may be the first steps to that. So that's a perfect segue into the next part of the training that will look into the more practical approaches. But before we do that, we do want to give you a little breather. So we're going to take a 10-minute coffee break. Perfect. We've stopped at 5:05. So I suggest we all come back at 3:15 CET, so 15 past the time, wherever you're located. So take the opportunity to take a little breather, drink, whatever you may need. And yeah, please come back in 10 minutes and we'll continue from here. Thanks, everyone.
See you in a bit.
See you in a bit.
We'll be starting in a few minutes again, but I saw some questions in the chat, so maybe I can already refer to those. I'm not sure if you hear Sagrario.
Might not be back yet. Ah, Doris is back, okay. So maybe those of you that are back, you can either turn on your video or put a little reaction icon, which you can find at the bottom, just so we have an idea of how many of you guys are back. Thanks, Anna. Antonio, Kim, yeah, great. Darius mentioned you're back. All right, so I think we'll still wait another minute then. I think if you're still not quite back. All right, I think a few others have indicated they're back. So how about if we get started then? We were just trying to say that there's a few questions in the chat. I've gone on to respond already a bit to Sagrario's point, but Dan, maybe you want to add on to that.
Yeah, so I'm just picking up on two questions before getting back to my presentation and training. One question was about the intrinsic values, if they're also included. And coming back to that, I think that is actually something within the materiality analysis you need to be very aware of. And within the protocol, there's actually two notions that you need to take into account. And one is the value to you as a company, and the other is the value to society. So even if it's not important to you as a company, you still have to account for it if it is of value to society. So in that respect, they should certainly pop up if there are some major values there within your materiality analysis. And the other question is a very interesting one on the role of farmers. In our full training, there is a whole chapter on it, especially in our module 2, because we do highlight that if farmers are not able to be sustainable because the financial means are not there to transition towards a more sustainable farming practices, then you will never achieve the goals that would be there in a natural capital assessment. So the role of farmers is very, very important within this. And that's also why we have an entire section on it within the module 2 training that will be there next week. So taking it from there, I hope you all enjoyed your coffee. We want to continue. So why would you assess impacts and dependencies? The business case is actually comprised of a lot of separate elements that may apply more or less for each individual company, but a few of the key issues are to start understand the relationships with nature, to have another look at your business model, also to see the sustainability of your business model, not only from an environmental sense, but also from a financial sense. If you are likely to suffer from problems in your supply chain, that can be a major financial issue for your business model. It's to mitigate risks, create new opportunities, inform decisions do you want to plan a big factory in an area where water scarcity issues will emerge over the next years? Or will you plan a cotton processing facility in an area where cotton farmer is no longer feasible in 10 years? So they can inform really, really important decisions. Increasingly, it can improve your access to finance as more and more financial institutions are also looking into natural capital. And quite an important one is the recruitment and retention of staff. More and more people want to work in companies that are intrinsically sustainable and that want to contribute to sustainability. So if you want to do a sustainability natural capital assessment, natural capital assessments can be at different levels, but one that we want to highlight here today is that doing a qualitative assessment can also already mean a lot. So just putting a group of knowledgeable people within your company, maybe some external stakeholders, maybe external expert, and really grow to the various stages of your supply chain, of your core processes, and indicate where risks and where opportunities, where impacts and dependencies lie when it comes to elements such as climate, water use, land use, soil quality, water quality, biodiversity, can already give you a lot of information that can inform some really tangible actions that you can take. For example, this is some work that we did with a small Dutch business that produces sustainable fish products, such as soups or burgers. And because they were a small company, they didn't have the means or the resources to do a very extensive accounting. But after these workshops, some really important insights already emerged. For example, because they were focusing on sustainable fish, of course, fishing is a big issue for them to look in, but because they were already engaging with sustainability experts and already working with the most sustainable fishers, that was not something that they needed to do a lot of follow-up actions on. But what they didn't realize before doing this assessment is that actually within their products, the amount of vegetables and herbs as a part of their product were actually 5 times higher than the amount of fish that was in their products, and that they didn't have a real clear understanding of where those vegetables originated from and what were the practices and the sustainability issues that had to do with those vegetables. So it really uncovered for them an important area of sustainability that they hadn't uncovered before. And also based on that, we created some really actionable next steps that they could easily implement and that were fit for the scale of their business. So where are we now in our learning objectives? We have now gained an understanding of what natural capital is and the linkage with business decisions. We have familiarized ourselves with impacts and dependencies as a concepts and with a number of risks and opportunities. So next up is some approaches and tools to actually start integrating natural capital into business decision making. And of course, that's also when it gets really exciting, really interesting, really blurry, and really complicated, because then you have to apply all these more general notions and concepts to the actual context and the actual scale of your company. And that's when it gets real interesting. So how can businesses apply natural capital? Of course, next week's training will be going into that much more deeply, but for today, one very important distinction we want to make is between measuring and valuing, and between measuring and valuing at a qualitative, a quantitative, and a monetary level. So on one hand, there's measuring. You can measure amounts, you can measure the amount of carbon sequestered, you can measure how many liters of clean water you put back into the system. You can measure the amount of biodiversity and the species that occur in your crop field. But it's another thing to value that. But valuing can also happen at these levels. So you can measure quantitatively, and you can measure qualitatively, but also with value. You can value qualitatively, just say, I prefer this over the other. But you can also go all the way and proceed to valuing monetary, and making the final leap from a qualitative amount, so many tons of carbon sequestered, to a financial amount, and that is worth amount X to society. On one hand, it seems that the monetary valuation really is the end game of natural capital thinking, of natural capital assessments. But on the other hand, it's also good to realize that a lot of information is also lost at that final stage of going to monetary values. So also really keeping an understanding of the quantitative values, what is happening on the ground, how many liters of water are there available, and how many do we use in our project, in our process, can be more informative in many ways than how much that water is worth when you really want to assess how you're doing. But on the other hand, when you are actually to establish a monetary value, in a lot of conversations that can be of great interest, especially when talking with a CFO, for example, or with a risk manager. But even more so if you're actually able to move beyond just the monetary assessment, but also moving towards a transaction where farmers actually get paid that amount because they are actually achieving these values or these ecosystem services. So moving beyond just assessing these values towards actual transactions and actual change on the ground, I think is when it becomes really interesting. But do not see monetary values always as the end game, because in the end it is actually about liters of water, tons of CO2 in the atmosphere, and not about euros and dollars or yens. And also be aware of these differences, and they can all three have their value in different contexts. Then business application, you can use natural capital assessments for various purposes. One is to assess risks and opportunities, to compare various options. Should I do A or B? To assess the impacts on stakeholders in your environment, to estimate the value of an impact, or to communicate about what you're doing as a company and your sustainability efforts. Now, there's a whole range of specific barriers that are relevant to the food and beverage industry, and I want to just address one for now because of the time, which is the business case. So on one hand, the long-term business case of regenerative agriculture is very apparent. A lot of research suggests that it's the way forward and also providing the most value for society. But we are still struggling, and that's also linking back to farmers, to change the perspective on the ground for an individual farmer to actually implement that nature inclusive or regenerative agriculture. And for companies that are somewhere in the middle of the supply chain, to have their short-term business case to actually drive that demand. So the business case on a long term is really clear, but we are still struggling to translate that into day-to-day changes. And I think the story which is next from Volkert will definitely be of much interest to that. Yeah, of course, please refer to the Natural Capital Protocol if you want to take up a journey yourself. Come by and visit one of the other trainings and one of the longer trainings if you really want to be guided all the way through. For time purposes, we have to be short now. Many examples exist out there. The Coca-Cola is a really interesting one, but all these examples can be found on the Natural Capital Coalition's website and on the WBCSD's website. And we have actually added a number of case studies. Among those is the case study of Eosta. And within those case studies, what we've done is not only focus on the outcomes of natural capital assessments and thinking, but also how do you get started with them and which are the practical obstacles that you actually encounter. So they're really, really worth reading if you want to start your own natural capital journey. And we will hear from Volkert shortly. But there are many other examples out there. And again, you can find those at the website of the WBCSD and the Natural Capital Coalition and the We Value Nature. And then another important resource is the Shift platform, where a whole range of natural capital tools is available. And also within our second module, we will go into a few of these tools and also tell you a bit more about which are easy to use and which are a bit more complex to use. So that's that may be of interest as well. Then the last bit that I want to tell before going to Volkert is that the first step after getting started is really to define your objective for your assessment, because what the objective you have is really important when to know and to be aware of what you want to do and how you want to achieve that in the start of your journey, because the Natural Capital Protocol is really a protocol about a process that you take and not a methodology that will tell you for each ecosystem how you have to value it, how you have to, which kind of data points you need. It's really about the process that you go through. And therefore, your objective is really important. Which kind of scopes do you take? Do you go, do you look at your own operations, or do you take a wider value chain boundary, also including upstream or downstream? Do you look at value to society, or first and foremost the value to your business? What kinds of baselines do you have, for example, in different locations or different moments in time? And yeah, in all, the decisions you make here are quite important for the rest of your journey. But the good thing also is that you will never be done with this, because when you get to step 9, you will always go back iteratively and redefine your objective and continue again. So it's not that you make a decision here at step 2 and that you're always stuck with it, but for your first iteration, your first assessment, this really drives your approach. And afterwards, you can start determining the most material impacts and dependencies, and then you actually start measuring them, measuring the potential for change and value them. And then after interpreting and taking action, you go back to defining the objective of what you want to do next. Yeah, I wish I could talk you a little bit more through this, but I think one of the huge assets of today is that we have Volkert with us. So I really want to give the stage to him. Just as a quick introduction for those who are not aware, Volkert is the CEO of Eosta. He often calls himself a simple greengrocer from the small town of Waddinxveen. But in all that modesty, it's also good to realize that he has become the most influential sustainability individual in the Netherlands in 2017, that he has won the Royal King Willem I Award of Willem-Alexander Award for Entrepreneurship, and actually was declared the winner of the huge European Commission Environment Award. So even simple green grocers from Waddinxveen can get somewhere when they put their hearts to it. Volkert, to you.
Thank you, Dan, and way too much honor, all these awards. I'll try to share my screen with you guys now, but I can't. It says here you cannot start screen share while the other, okay. But now I can restart again. Yeah. Here we go. Is this visible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Dan, thank you very much for your really helpful work in structuring this approach to cost accounting and to monetizing the impact on people and planet. But I thought before I zoom into a few more practical examples, I zoom out. I think the bigger picture is simple. The new normal is an economy that stays within the planetary boundaries and the social foundations. And this is brilliantly put together in this donut economics model developed by Kate Rayworth. Obviously, the question is how do you do this? Why don't these slides, they don't seem to want to move. Stuck. Do you still hear me?
Yeah, we can still hear you. Maybe if you stop sharing and then get on to the next slide instead.
Yeah. Everything is stuck now.
Do you still have the sharing screen option, Volkert?
Yeah, I'm on it. Trying.
Super.
No.
No,
Not working. Stop share.
Volkert, I've heard you eloquently talk to a full room without any sheets before.
Yeah, this was my third attempt. No, that's fine. Okay, apologies for this. For some reason, it doesn't want to work. The question is, how do we approach this new economy that stays within the people and planet boundaries, basically? And I think Dan already said how important it is to be clear about your objective. And our objective is to dream, dance, and deliver. So if we want to deliver a meaningful footprint on this planet for our kids, we need to dance to address the people issue, how we organize ourselves. And that all starts with a dream, which is basically a purpose question. And if you zoom out a little bit again, you can see dream, dance, deliver also as an image for people, for planet, people, and profit. So if we want to deliver a meaningful footprint on the planet, we need to reorganize people, but that all starts with the profit definition, which in a way is a purpose question. And nobody would agree with this idea that it is very profitable if we kill the planet and exploit a few kids in the Far East. And still, this seems to be the prevailing profit definition. So I think if we talk about the post-corona new normal, we should embrace an economy that embraces the right profit definition that includes damage or benefits to people and planet. And since we believe that there's no sustainability without transparency, we are providing all of our products with a little stamp that enables the grower and the customer to see where that product comes from. And a little QR code guides you to the unique story of that grower, but also his impact on people and planet. And we do that on the basis of what we call a sustainability flower that includes indicators related to people and planet, such as soil fertility, water, biodiversity, climate, but also a series of social indicators related to unleashing the unique potential of the individual, equal opportunities, and a fair distribution of wealth. Then the question is, how do you apply this? Because so far, I think we all agree that this is terribly important. But if we do not only want to organize conferences on this, but also if we want to apply this to our business practices, it is important to identify what, as we see it, 5 M's. And the first M stands for measure the impact. So you basically define your baseline. Where do you stand and how do you want to measure and what sort of indicators are available? GRI driven, sustainable development goals driven. Best define your own indicators, which I would have loved to share with you, but maybe screen sharing starts up later again. The next M is about the materiality check. So if you're in the fruit business, animal welfare is probably not a terribly important thing. So you define together with your stakeholders what impact you have on people and planet, and where you can apply the 2080 rule. Sort of what indicators define 20% of all indicators that have 80% of your impact. So that's the second M, the materiality check. And then you decide on what you want to manage. That is the third M. So you define targets for next year, what you want to improve, and how and with whom. And then you have a fourth M, because growers usually say, in our case, it's avocado growers, mango growers, pineapple growers in Africa, in the tropics, and all around the world. They would say, listen, Engelsman, I'm deeply moved because of your commitment to sustainability. Really, I am, tears in my eyes. But how can I become green if my figures are red? So you have a fourth M responsibility called marketing. You want eventually the market to reward the grower for his ecosystem services or for his social services. So how can he afford to pay a living wage to his farm workers if we don't pay him the right price? So that's where transparency really kicks in, that you want to be transparent as you can in your marketing and communication efforts with your supply chain partners, and particularly with the Neanderthals called retailers, who actually hate transparency, because in a sort of desperate attempt to race to the bottom for the lowest price at the expense of people and planet, just to satisfy a short-term profit-driven shareholder, you don't get anywhere. So you want to bypass that retailer as much as you can and reach out to the consumer so he can make an informed purchase decision. But since you don't want to be trapped in a short-term profit definition yourself, you need to embrace new governance principles that do not stop at the usual suspects called financial stakeholders. You want to include stakeholders that represent natural and social capital as well. So as a company, we did not only monetize the impact, which is the fourth element, the fifth element, M, monetize the impact on a per product level, but also on a corporate level, piloting a very sort of modest way of a new profit and loss account that also says something about the profitability or not on your social and capital impact. And then we said, okay, then we have a tick in the box of governance. We have a tick in the box of a new profit and loss account. We have a tick in the box that we know where to campaign for more health or for more water holding capacity of soils. We just had a campaign this morning in The Hague, because it's election time here, where we spoke to ministers and politicians and sold them a few avocados, saying that organic is not too expensive, but conventional is too cheap, as long as you don't price in the correct costs of water, biodiversity, and climate change, or other losses to natural or social capital. And we started not only to communicate to policymakers, not only to our shareholders, stakeholders, the financial sector, that seems to be gaining momentum when it comes to pricing the externalities for risk mitigation reasons, as Dan already mentioned. The financial sector, is important to mention that here, is increasingly performing climate stress tests, biodiversity stress tests, health stress tests, living wage stress tests, because they realize if they don't, then that if a company doesn't address these issues, that forms a risk for the investors. And if you want to mitigate these risks, then you better implement sustainability indicators in your RAROCs, in your risk-adjusted return on capital. If you don't, you actually risk your profitability on the long term. So risk mitigation is an important thing. The financial sector is an important ally on this journey called sustainability, underway to the new normal that embraces a profit definition that includes natural and social capital. But we didn't only stop there. We decided to also talk to our consumers about this, because after all, we want to generate an income for our growers. So you have to be transparent about the impact on soil or water or biodiversity or health. And we decided to visualize this. So we had shelf stoppers saying, buy these avocados and save 26,000 liters of water or biodiversity or fertile soil per hectare per year. And on the flip side of the shelf stopper, we would have the calculation and the benchmark and the templates that we applied. Now, usually, and I'll finish with that, I would have loved to share a few examples of how we capitalize on this on the shop floor. And the trouble with this is it's difficult to find retailers to team up with you, because why would they sort of take mock 80% of their product range that is conventional and anonymous, and where the price of natural and social capital is not factored into the final consumer price? And why would they embrace an idea, a supplier like ourselves, that wants to highlight the idea that these pineapples, organic pineapples, are not too expensive, but the conventional equivalent is too cheap? And actually, we are totally transparent about the impact on soil fertility or water or living wage. We monetized it, and we calculate in front of the consumer what the real price of that avocado should be. Obviously, we can't expect consumers to solve this only. We need government to interfere and to provide a level playing field in the market driven by regulation and also fiscal bonus malus incentives that create a level playing field where the polluter no longer gets away with a competitive advantage. But we haven't got there yet. So pioneering the new normal also means that you stick out your neck, and if necessary, do that in a guerrilla way, in an illegal way. So we usually smuggled the true cost accounting ingredients into the packaging, so the consumer would only discover this after he unpacks the avocado or mango at home. And we would gain a little bit of time because retailers are tremendously bureaucratic, which is great because they usually only discover this weeks after you've supplied the product. And by the time they discover, they give you a delisting warning. And usually after the third warning, they kick you out. And by that time, we usually finish the season. So that was okay. And so finally, Dan, and then back to you again. Our principle with this whole adventure is where there is a will, there's a detour. Leadership is not about the following majority, but about a trend-setting minority. It depends as an entrepreneur where you want to position yourself. Do you want to position yourself with the following losers or with the trend-setting leaders? And with that slightly provocative final remark, back to you, Dan.
Yes, thank you very much for that. I think that was very inspiring, but I have two very practical questions for you.
Yes, please.
I'm quite sure that you have an answer for, because we've talked about it before. But if you want to start implementing some of this within your own company, can you tell us something about the collaborations and the way that you can increase your circle of influence internally and externally?
Thank you very much for the question. I think it all starts with that dream. So don't follow any other authority than the authority that sits sort of here at heart level in yourself. And that is something crucially important. But then you quickly move to dance, because you may have a lot of questions and no answers. And particularly not if you, and thanks for all the compliments, but we really are a simple greengrocer in Waddinxveen West, who certainly have no answers, but thanks God, we have people like yourselves. We have the natural and social. We have the Capitals Coalition. We have the Paul Polmans and the WBCSD. We have TEEB. We have the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity think tank. We have other UN-based think tanks that develop templates, and there are plenty potential partners around who you can co-create the new normal with. And that's what we call dance. So look for partners who you feel comfortable with, who can assist you, because only in that dialogue, that 1 + 1 makes 3 dialogue, you get anywhere. On your own, you get nowhere. And obviously that starts within your company. And even within your company, you have the followers and the leaders. So select a handful of leaders that share the same dream, and then start dancing, co-creating the new normal, so you can prototype something that will deliver a meaningful footprint on the market we all wish so badly.
Thanks so much, Volkert. Maybe we can take one question that's in the chat here from Jonathan, which is it not possible to achieve the same economies of scale for organic food as is achieved with non-organic food? What are the stumbling blocks or hurdles along the way for that?
I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly. How do you mean economies of scale? You mean organic is smaller, so you don't have the economies of scale?
Yeah, so I guess you mentioned it's like a cost difference. Organic food's way more expensive than non-organic food. So how can you level that playing field? Because it's not a level playing field, as I think you alluded to. It's hard to convince retailers to go with organic food products because they're more expensive on average. I'm assuming that.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jonathan, for the question. The obstacles in retail is that if you want, you can make more money on a conventional avocado pulp something they called guacamole. If you reduce the avocado content to 0.3% avocado powder, I mean, that's way more profitable for your shareholder than if you would put in real avocado. So that has nothing to do with economies of scale and everything with a short-term profit definition that we need to get rid of. It's, this guacamole they're offering is not only very bad for your taste buds, it's not very good for long-term for our kids either. Back to the economies of scale question, yes, organic, even if Frans Timmermans and Wojciechowski, the agricultural commissioner, are arguing that we should have 25% market share Europe-wide for all member states within a few years. So, how small is small and how mainstream is mainstream? I think 25% is pretty serious mainstream. But even if you would consider the existing 10 to 15% that we have right now, that is already pretty much mainstream. You're not talking about, as far as I can see, and at least in the neck of the woods that I oversee, there is no disadvantage when it comes to economies of scale for organic, because we travel in the same Hapag-Lloyd and Maersk ships, and we travel in the same 40-foot reefer sea freight containers. And we use the same, the warehouse over here is 35,000 square meters, and there's just one warehouse we are operating here. So I don't see any disadvantage there. When it comes to applying transparency, I think retailers have an economy of scale advantage when it comes to communicating to the public. So I would say, finally, they have an even higher responsibility to be transparent about their footprint and have the guts to not only talk to and listen to their short-term profit-driven shareholder, but also to their consumer and the kids of their consumers when it comes to providing transparency with regards to natural and social capital. The fact that we are doing it and they are not, that's what I would like to say to you, Jonathan. I don't know if that addresses your question, though.
Yeah, I guess it also meant that you mentioned not all products include the cost of natural capital in it. So I was trying to work out, how do you level the playing field there? How do you get conventional food to also include the cost of natural capital? Or
okay, got it. Well, for instance, by introducing a meat tax, which we are pushing here in Holland right now, we seem to have quite the vast majority of all parties behind it, to put a tax on meat. Not because we believe in communism and taxes, but simply believe in providing a level playing field in which the polluter, in this case, my previous employer, Cargill, no longer gets away with a competitive advantage over plant-based proteins, because animal-based proteins are simply disastrous when it comes to soil fertility. The water footprint of that meat, 15,000 litre for a kilo of beef. They're disasters when it comes to killing biodiversity, rainforests. They're disasters when it comes to methane and nitrous oxide emissions caused by cows and caused by mineral fertilizer. I mean, who's paying for all that? Certainly not the meat producer. So if you would tax meat and you would generate a little bit of extra income to force meat growers to pay for their damage, then you would create a more level playing field. And if you would then not tax the value that is created by fruit and veg, so you would reduce that VAT to zero, but you would sort of tax the extracted value produced by meat, then you would, just to give you an example, come closer to a more level playing field. You're far from a real level playing field, but it's a beginning. And it sounds quite promising that we'll be getting there in Holland.
Well, thanks very much, Volkert, for your passionate words there. One last bit that I like to say before finishing and going back to Katja is that some initial research that is actually coming up when you do a natural capital assessment suggests that compensating for bad practices is much more expensive than actually doing it right and getting it right. So I think
Thank you.
and we can get optimistic again when we start realizing that. Katja, back to you.
Thanks so much, Dan. What a nice way to end. And obviously, huge thanks to Volkert. When we did the interview with Volkert together with Dan and Iris, I think it was already end of last year, there was one thing that really struck to me, which I found was really helpful. Volkert, you said to not be afraid, first of all, to ask questions and to also start small. And to really focus on your circle of influence. And I thought that's always a really helpful tip to share with anyone that's looking to start, because we often have sometimes the sense of pressure of wanting to start right away really big, but actually sometimes where you can have most influence and power is actually in those first few small steps that you can take now. So I do want to just thank again, Volkert, because your words are always inspiring, and sometimes we underestimate the importance, especially for people really looking to get started on that. So I've included on this slide, which obviously you guys will all receive after this training, the few top pieces of advice that Volkert has shared with us, and that I think anyone should look into. And it includes his really nice philosophy around dreaming and dancing, which I love as well. So thanks again, Volkert, for everything.
Thank you, Katja. Thank you very much.
So I'm going to end with a very quick wrap up since we're coming to the end of this training. Key takeaways very quickly. We've seen how every business impacts and depends on nature, and that's particularly relevant to the food and beverage industry. We've seen how applying a natural capital approach is a really useful lens into other topics and issues you may be working on already, but especially needs to be understood as a tool to make more informed decisions. We've also seen that there's lots of tools and resources, and we're going to look into those in more detail next week during Module 2. Something we haven't addressed so much today, but we'll again see a bit more next week, is that assessments are a bit like snowflakes. They're all going to be quite different, really based on where you're coming from, which sector, and what's your overall purpose as well. And finally, I think, again, Volkert's example is a great way to see there's many ways that you can get started as a company. And sometimes it's really about just getting on that first initial step. Another thing I want to add here, which is a really important piece we've touched on only very quickly with Volkert, is the whole question around buy-in, because that's a really crucial aspect that needs to happen throughout your assessment. And really being able to create that kind of conducive company environment for integrating natural capital. And so together with Dan and Iris, what we've also developed, and this was very much in response again to this useful roundtable we did back in May, was we realized there's a need to better understand what are the different needs, actions, and challenges for different actors within the supply chain. So what you can see here is we've created helpful little persona cards, and on each one of them, we set out what are going to be those different elements, needs, challenges, actions, how to engage with these different actors that you see here. So we've done that for the sustainability manager, the CEO, the CFO, the farmer, and many others. And it's just to say that creating that not only conducive environment, but also actually engaging with those internal allies is absolutely crucial. And especially when you feel stuck, reach out to those that you know you can ask questions to. Reach out to those few colleagues that might be on board onto the subject. Or if you don't have those internal allies yet, then go out. There's many ways now that you can connect with people that are passionate about that and that will be happy to accompany you on that journey. So these are little cards that we'll be happy to share with you after this training as well, and that hopefully will inspire you in kind of taking the next step. If you are really eager to get a bit more practical and hands-on after this training, there's also some really useful little interactive videos that the Capitals Coalition have developed and that you can download on their website or through the link that we have on our slides here. And I've already mentioned that all of our We by Nature training materials are free for you to use and download. As you can see here, we've adapted also all of the training materials. So that's the slides, speaker notes, etc., into different lengths, so that depending on whom you might be interested in using the material for, you can actually use those different lengths. So we've already mentioned several times, we really encourage you to join our training next week if you have interest, and Iris will drop the link to register. And module 2 is really going to be about getting the necessary understanding and resources on how to scope a first natural capital assessment. So looking much more into what it means to identify impacts and dependencies, how do you get started on measuring these, as well as a quick introduction into some valuation techniques as well. Next steps that you can take, well, first of all, we encourage you to have a look into the Natural Capital Protocol. If you don't want to look at the huge protocol, very understandably, you can look at the summary that we've sent to you. We encourage you to also have a look at the numerous inspiring business stories that we have on We Value Nature's website and WBCSD's website as well. And then I really encourage you to share this material, share what you've learned today in the training with your colleagues, with your friends, and try and start bringing on board some of those people that may be less on board. Now is the best time to do that. And so finally, I'll just close by reminding you that we have many other sessions happening throughout this 10-day challenge event. In total, it's more than 40 sessions and still another 35 to go. So don't hesitate to have a look at the full program. We're also launching daily challenges, again, to really encourage you to take that next step, that action around nature. So actually today's challenge is to share what is your way of pitching the importance of nature. How do you pitch the business case internally? And so I invite you to take part into that challenge. And then finally, we do have the Capitals community platform where we can continue exchanging and discussing any questions you may have. This is free for anyone to join. It's a great space where many of the participants have already come in to discuss. And we would also love to get your feedback on this session. And again, Iris will drop the link in there for you. Last point, WBCSD is going to be doing a big event around our Vision 2050, which is an important piece of work that we've been working on for the past year and a half. It's again going to be an event that's open to all and will be happening on the 25th of March. Again, you'll have the link to register to that once I send you the slides after this training. And that's it from me. So that just leaves me to say, well, obviously, huge thanks to Dan and Iris in conducting this training. Again, big thanks to Volkert for your inspiring story. And obviously, a big thanks to all of you guys for sticking on today onto this training, which I hope you found useful. And I hope to see you all next week as well. So take care, everyone, and speak soon.